And I'm honored to introduce our guest today for the seminar, Dr. Taapsi Ramchandani. And Dr. Ramchandani is the founder and CEO of Pucho. Is that?
That's correct.
She earned her bachelor's degree in economics at Ohio Wesleyan, and then an MA in public administration at Syracuse, followed by a PhD in anthropology at Syracuse. And we talk increasingly in anthropology today about aligning what we're doing with industry so that our students are more employable in the private sector. And of course, an example at Boise State is UXR and also data science. But we don't talk as much about entrepreneurship. So one thing that I was really excited about having Dr. Ramchandani as a visitor is the focus on entrepreneurship, not getting jobs, but creating your own job. And that's what she's going to talk with us about today. We also talk about our globalized world and anthropology. Of course, anthropologists work all around the world, but we've all gotten very used to Zoom this year, and we don't seem to be making the use we could to visit internationally. So I was also really excited at the prospect of having a speaker from Mumbai live in Boise and making that connection. The format of the present talk will be a presentation of about 30 minutes, followed by questions. And if you have a question that pops in your head earlier, you're welcome to put it in the chat. And I'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to get to both the live questions and also questions in the chat. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ramchandani. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you for that introduction, Kendall, and I'm very impressed with your pronunciation of my last name. So that was bang on. Yes, as I have already been introduced, Dr. Taapsi Ramchandani, I probably would like to start with a couple of labels that apply to me: anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, practicing anthropologist. I'm also a mother to a 3-year-old. I'm a first-time entrepreneur. I'm a female entrepreneur, and I'm also the CEO of my company. In addition to these really nice descriptors, I'm also a gardener. I'm also a cook. I'm also a hustler. Actually, I would say I'm a hustler more than anything else that I've lived before. And I can also, just for shits and giggles, I can also write backwards and upside down and backwards upside down, if that's going to help you remember this talk and me a little better by the end of it. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the context of this talk. Let me start by saying that it's pretty obvious now that we live in an experience economy, and that is really the premise of what I'm trying to do with my work at Pucho. By the way, Pucho in Hindi means ask. And that was why we named the company that, because we wanted to encourage brands and organizations to ask more questions and eliminate more of the guesswork that comes on account of not talking to customers that much. So coming back to this context of an experience economy, we live in this every single day, right? We hold brands to high standards. We are pleasantly surprised or repulsed when Google can predict our search results based on a handful of keywords or something else that we did on a different site. We're expecting brands today to keep up, and businesses, brands for their part, know that in order to differentiate themselves, they need to start offering or offer more personalized services, more customized solutions. So, I did a study with a client once, my team did, and the customers of that client told us that what kept them with the brand was not its price, which was actually higher than its competitors, and not only the quality of the product, but also critically the relationship that they had with their sales lead. the person who got them through the door that first time. They felt that personal connection. And in the midst of a culture where people can upsell you things, what they were really looking for was a human connection. We have seen, just in the last few years, the opening up of business roles like chief experience officers, which go up to the C-suite of a company. And there's been this increase again because more and more brands, the ones that care a lot about customer experience, they have made the space in the boardroom for CXO level positions. You also have consumers who are more comfortable using chat and messaging apps. So I use it a lot in a lot of my own interactions with brands. In fact, in India, WhatsApp is so prevalent that when there used to be a time where you put in your email address to get newsletters. Now they ask you for your phone number so that they can send you a WhatsApp message and they can then have a chat conversation with you. And I'm really comfortable with that. And we're seeing more and more customers moving to different ways of interacting and engaging with their brand on an ongoing basis. So I don't know how many of you might know this, but Jeff Bezos has been so obsessed with his customers that when he set up Amazon, and even now in Amazon meetings, they famously keep one chair empty in the meeting room. And the reason they do that is because he wants to very tangibly customer into the conversation that business leaders might be having. So before you decide to do something or implement a new business strategy, the idea is you look at that empty seat, think of the customer who should be sitting there and what would he or she want? And is this a solution that he or she would want? Again, kind of bringing the conversation, moving the conversation from service or product to solutions to solve problems and needs. Now, you might have heard of the term use case. And if you haven't, then give me an opportunity. I'd like the opportunity here to talk a little bit about that. It means an example of an application of a solution to a real world problem. So businesses want to know the use cases for what their product or their service might be most helpful. So for example, let's say that if a brand like Starbucks knew that when you buy coffee, you're actually doing it to discover a new brand or discover new brands of coffee. You're someone who's adventurous and wants to try out new things, as opposed to going in and repeating the same order, then they could think about spinning up, let's say, a surprise order pack for $25 that you get every month, where you can sample new coffee brands. Now, they can uncover this use case about why someone went in to buy a cup of coffee and what their motivation was without actually talking to people. And this is where applied anthropology comes in. So anthropology, fundamentally, many of you might already know this, is a study of human culture. It's a study of relationships of people to social systems and shared values and norms across a group of people. Anthropology in practice is the application of our theory and theoretical training methods and our thinking models to real world contexts. So within the discipline, actually, there's a further bifurcation of applied anthropology versus practicing anthropology, but I'm just going to club both of them together and just speak of it as applied anthropology for this talk. And, since the 60s and 70s, applied anthropology has kind of been slowly, coming to the forefront, especially, coming from that time. You had the wars, the Vietnam War, the Cold War. You had all these foreign policy makers who were interested in understanding and appreciating the cultural context before they went in with their before they negotiated any deals or worked in an intergovernmental capacity. But since then, even businesses have grown to understand and appreciate the application of anthropology or cultural systems, ways of looking at the world, in order to forge better relationships that are cross-border in particular. So the need for anthropologists, even outside of policy, has grown tremendously. And I truly believe that the golden age for applied anthropology is going to be now, where we're sitting on more data than we know what to do with. And the question now becomes, what of this data, which data sets are more valuable or useful or meaningful towards furthering the agenda of a business, of an organization, or a movement or initiative. So anthropology in practice or applied anthropology continues to largely be dominated by the sociocultural strain. We're concerned with the cultural context, social settings, social networks, socioeconomic forces that are shaping whatever it is that we're researching. This work is paid for by non-academic institutions. I have clients who work in the private sector. And as a result of that, sometimes I find that the work that I do is more tactical in nature. By this, I mean that clients are looking for real recommendations to real problems that they can solve pretty quickly, right? And there's a tight deadline attached to this. So a lot of the solutions tend to be tactical. And sometimes when there's space, they can be strategic. They can fundamentally shape the vision or the direction of that company. So at Pucho, for example, there are 3 spaces in which we apply anthropological thinking towards real world solutions. One is in the space of marketing, where a brand would come to us and say that, hey, we want to expand our reach. And for that, we need to know the language to use that resonates with what our consumers are already using or thinking about, or how they make sense of things in the world, meaning making, and what are those words or contexts. So it's in that reference that we might do research for them. We also help them with product roadmaps and product strategy. So this happens when a product or a tech company comes to us and says, hey, we are building this, but we want to know what to prioritize because we could do anything and everything. Now, how do you understand what to prioritize? You understand that by actually talking to people, so that you can go to a client and say, of this laundry list of 10 or 15 things that you could offer, we actually think you should only focus on 3 because these solve a real problem and they will satisfy a particular need. So uncovering and prioritizing what should be built as a product, which basically we're talking about solutions again, right? Think of a product less in terms of the features and more in terms of what are the solutions for which features will help. And that's what we can help them unpack. And lastly, and this is truly at a strategic level, this would be to validate a business hypothesis, which means, is there even a problem here? So this applies particularly in the context of startups, because startups have an idea about what they want to do and may not fully or may not be confident that this is really a problem behind which they need to put their weight, their money, their time, and their resources. And so we can help them validate that by actually talking to their ideal target segment and trying to truly understand, is there a need for this? And then come back to the company and say, yes, there is actually this need, you should go ahead with it. Or say, this is not that important right now, they're solving it doing X, Y, and Z, and they're happy doing that. And they may not value or pay for the service that or product experience that you're looking to provide. So really, it's always a balancing act between tactical and strategic, and tactical ends up being more likely what you'll be hired to do or what we end up being hired to do than strategic, but we also have strategic feedback, strategic inputs. So our job as researchers is primarily to interpret, right? We deconstruct meaning through intensive field work, through witnessing and logging observations and conversations, and eventually revealing those underlying patterns and associated assumptions. And this field work that we do can happen sequentially over weeks or months, but it could also take place in staccato mode, right? Like in bursts over time. So my field, when I was doing my work in Trinidad and Tobago, that's where I did my PhD dissertation. I spent a year in Trinidad, but I'd been going there for about 3 years prior to that. So from 2013 to 2016, I was visiting my field site. I did my research alone. I think most researchers, especially in master, I mean, almost everyone, masters and PhD levels, you're by yourself doing this and figuring out the field and access and your research by yourself. However, in the real world, this work is largely interdisciplinary in nature. So very few times you might work alone. You might have heard of, a team of one, a research team of one, which is also very possible. But oftentimes, because of the ripple effect, the implications of the research that we do, you will be working with designers, you might be working with data scientists, you might be working with marketing teams, marketing leads, in order to transform your insights into actionable outcomes. So anthropologist, I really like this quote by Marilyn Strathern. She speaks of ethnography as that which points to the dimensionality of phenomena, right? Like this notion that there's always more than one thing to consider, and ethnographies are a really powerful way of doing that. There's a Google researcher named Julia Haynes who published a paper a few years ago, and she talks about the digital as dimensionality, saying that the meaningful ethnographies of today, of the 21st century, are going to be those that can unpack the relationships between online and offline worlds, because they're both highly connected spheres of social activity, in her words. And we know this all the time. Our lives, especially since COVID, straddle both online and the online and offline context. Either way, anthropology as a mode of inquiry is a multi-dimensional study of collective human experiences that should ideally rely on data triangulation, which means you're using a bunch of different methods like those listed over here, and you're putting 2-3 different data points together to paint that holistic picture. But how do you sell the value of slow data, right? Which is the kind of data that we collect, to corporations and institutions for whom time is sliced into 45-minute calls and weekly reports and 2-week sprints. And this is the reality and the tension that anthropologists face when they're out there in the corporate sector. It's something that we have had to grapple with and really optimize on our own in order to meet those needs of the client. So this is a business wheel that a colleague and I came up with when we were doing a workshop organized by the AAA, actually, on how to start a business in the midst of a pandemic. So what we did is we came up with this because we were both from the startup space. He and I both had started companies, and we put this together because truly this is what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I've put this up not really to just talk about, what happens in my life, but also to tell you that when you go out there and you think about applying anthropology, you're probably going to be working with startups and companies that are doing the exact same thing, right? They have a core value proposition. I'm going to sell cheap coffee, right? If that's it. And then you have these things that happen around it constantly on a day-to-day basis. You're navigating, building your brand, selling your service, building your team, and obviously funding your venture or getting revenue, depending on whatever route you take. And then you have all of these spokes outside to support each of those things. Now, when a researcher gets hired, when we get hired, it is our job to see where we align with one of these slices, because the best value that we can provide as researchers is align ourselves with a business goal and objective. So rather than thinking about, oh, I can think about this anthropological theory and I can use this method that'll take me, 4 months or 6 months, or let me do this, and they would love it if I gave them a deck that is less important than aligning your solutions to what it is that the brand is already focusing on. So one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was starting out was, when you are pitching to a business, or even when you've taken that call for a business, you've taken a business meeting call, just a discovery call to see what this is about, do your homework in terms of understanding what the company's annual revenue is. Right? Find out if they've had any funding. Look at their LinkedIn profile and see what are they posting about. Are they hiring for particular positions? Are they hiring for engineering? Right? Do they have a very active marketing, Instagram channel or a LinkedIn channel where there's a lot of content coming out? Because that will give you a sense of not only the health of the business, but what is their priority in this moment, so that when you pitch them, you are speaking to that priority. You've already done some of your homework. And you can think about where that business fits, where its priorities are, by looking at this wheel to a certain extent, right? So anthropology in practice can truly move the needle if we can align ourselves to one of these slices, one or more of these slices. In all likelihood, it's going to be one slice at a time. And our job as researchers is to put ourselves in the shoes of our client. And where are they in their business cycle? And how can we move them along is the question that we need to be asking ourselves. So here are just some quick case studies, things that we've done that may give you some context as to how we actually applied this. So this is Copra Coconuts. They are a pretty big Series B company, and they have strong revenues coming in. They sell coconut meat, coconut products to consumers, as well as B2B, business to business accounts. And when they came to us, they were doing really well, but they didn't know who their customers were. They knew that people were buying, but they weren't fully, they didn't have the finger on the pulse of, but who are they? What are they buying it for? What are they buying coconut for? Is it for self? Is it to start a small home business? Is it for their kids? And so what we did for them is we spoke to their customers, laid out, mapped out personas for them. We call them pathway personas because of how we organize the information. And eventually at the end of this exercise, we worked very closely with their marketing team to change the way in which they spoke about the brand and advertised the brand on their social media platform. And as a result of doing that, they saw a dramatic change in their numbers, most significantly a change in their revenue numbers, by putting content out that was directly resonating with what their audience wanted. So in this case, we learned that what the audience was looking for was information on the nutritional value of coconut. And so you'll see on their Instagram page, there's a lot of emphasis now on them talking about, 30% more potassium and, 120% more hydration. And, those functional aspects of coconut is what they were able to talk about and adopt because of the research that we did for them based on their customers. So here's another case. This is Beandeck. It's a coffee aggregator marketplace in India. And here as well, we spoke to their customers, and what we helped them do was narrow down on the customer experience based on one group, one persona over another persona. So the idea being that there were many different types of people who were buying coffee, but there was one group that was particularly interested in the value proposition that Beandeck was offering. And so we helped them double down on that and said, hey, hone in your effort and your resources, put it towards this one group that cares about all these things that you're already hitting, and optimize for that before you go somewhere else with the brand. And so this again helped them really, and they are a startup, so it really helped them get some focus, which is very critical in the early stages of a startup. You don't want to stretch yourself too thin. You want to just double down in one space where you know that you are likely to get brand loyalists. This is another company. This is a B2B brand that we worked on, that we worked with. And here as well, what we did was it was largely around user experience research. So it was anchored in a product experience. We spoke to users of that product, again, mapped it out in terms of personas, understood their journey map in terms of all the different touch points when they go through the product. And the output of this was prioritizing for them what product features they should be focusing on in their next 2 business cycles. So what this did was it helped them, it led to a 70% reduction in their development time because it was hyper-focused now. They didn't have to do 10 things at once. They already had the answers in terms of what they needed to focus on and how they needed to get from point A to point B. And all of this came by directly talking to their end customers. Another brand, this is the last case study that I want to point out here, is a collectibles platform called New Street. And they started by focusing on sneaker collectors. and what they wanted, because when they came to us, they had not even launched. They didn't even have a website. All they had was an idea about what they wanted to do. And so what we did for them is we vetted the idea, we validated their business hypothesis, and confirmed the ideas and the thoughts that the founders had in their mind about what they wanted to do, and also helped them hone in on what aspect of their ideas they should prioritize. So all in all, from these 4 case studies, if there's one thing to take away, is with qualitative research, the kind of research that we do, it's less focused on, statistical significance. We're not dealing with big numbers. I rarely do research with more than 20 participants for any study. The objective is to validate ideas. It's to do discovery and uncover new ideas so that there is a better direction in which to go to. Companies will keep iterating. What research helps them with is know which direction to double down on and continue to do their own experimentation in the marketplace. And that's really what we have come to realize is our value add. So coming back to this idea of slow data, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. We started the company in 2019 and at the end of 2019, so it's not even been 3 years. But there is this tension between the kind of methodologies that we adopt and what businesses want, right? And those fast cycles and how they want this to be aligned. And where I've landed up is thinking about selling slow data, which is what we do, right? We collect information over time, by paradoxically representing it through bite-sized research insights. And I'm going to tell you what that means, right? But at the end of each research sprint, so to speak, what my team sits on is a montage of insight nuggets that allow us to recreate long-form fieldwork in modular form, if you may. So I'm still trying to get to that depth and that complexity and that thick description. I'm just doing it in bits and pieces because that's easy for clients to digest, right? And it's easy for us to deliver faster so they can stay in touch with the research as it happens. It's an opportunity for us to also be more collaborative rather than this being a black box that they don't know what happens. And at the end of 3 months, you get a debt, right? And we wanted to move away from that and kind of open up the research process and insights along the way. So when there are 3 ways in which three types of experiences that we do research on: user experiences, brand experiences, and cultural experiences. And when COVID happened, given the context of COVID, it is not as easy to get people physically to come to you in order for research to happen, but it's also opened up our minds in terms of, do we really even need to? Right? Do we need to bring people in when we can go to where they're at virtually? And that really is the premise of what Bucho does. Even before COVID happened, because I just told you we started in 2019, that was before COVID happened. We were, already digital. We had adopted digital research methods as our mandate from the get-go, because I wanted to be able to do research that spanned across boundaries. I did not want to be restricted by geography and also by a labor force, because I'm going to otherwise need researchers on the ground in order to go to sites, and that involves a lot of overhead costs. And I'm more interested in scaling qualitative research, if that is even possible, but that's where I want to end up. So I knew that the starting point for this had to be with digital research methods. So our methodology, I'll take you through that, allows us to bridge the gap between just a one-time survey tool and in the field work. So we do this in 3 ways. We have 3 research sprints: problem space interviews, diaries, and then solution space interviews. And I will just quickly take you through them. So we realized that the biggest hurdle to doing good digital research is building participant rapport. because you're not face to face. And so what we do right now is we insist on video interviews, even if that video, and we end up masking those videos when we show it to the client. So we are protecting participant identities. But when we do it with the participant as a researcher, we insist on seeing the face and them seeing our face and us seeing their face, because that's all we've got. We've got visual cues to build that rapport to the best of our ability. And so in the first part, the video interviews, as I said, it builds rapport, and it also allows us to get a baseline for what it is that we want to study, because these are semi-structured interviews as we are trained in. So it allows us to kind of dig in and get some context and get some depth in terms of the topic at hand. So here's just an example of a recording. I've taken permission from her, so I'm showing you her face. So here's just, let's see if this.
I've set alerts on my stuff. Got it. So I get alerts, and that alert, I need to go on the laptop because I don't do market, and I hardly do market. I'm not a market person. I don't have time for it. But if there's an alert coming, which I have set, then I need to go on the laptop.
Okay, so you don't do any market stuff on your phone. You do it all on your laptop.
I don't do actually any banking on my mobile.
Why?
So the reason this was a study where we were trying to understand how baby boomers are using their phones during the lockdown, in particular, when a lot of services moved online, things that they weren't usually doing even before the lockdown, they started doing that online. And yet we were hearing, especially from the demographic that was over 55, that they would not bank on their phone. And then we kind of unpacked that in the study about why that is. They would shop online and they would do other things online, but they wouldn't bank online. So this was just an interview that we did in the midst of the lockdown to understand their digital consumption habits. The second sprint is a diary, and diaries are really powerful tools if you can manage to do that, because diaries are a form of doing participant observation, right? You can collect in-context data from participants while they're responding from their own turf, right? So it's a series of remote intercepts where we might send them a message and say, hey, good morning. Can you share a video of you using coconut in your breakfast today? Just so we know how you're consuming that item, and we know how it matters. And interestingly, not just them, and this is all self-reported, so they are choosing to share this information with us over a period of time, which is why it's called a diary. But by incorporating multimedia into it and asking them to respond in the form of videos, pictures, images, we are also getting a sense of the environment in which they operate, right? So that's the power of participant observation. It's not just you sitting there and watching them do something, but you're also taking in the context, right? What else is on the table, right? When they're doing something in the kitchen, what are other things next to them? Are they having brown sugar with their coffee? Do they only drink it black? Can you see the equipment that they're using, even though that may or may not be directly connected to the question that you ask them? So this really allows us to get as close to that information as possible. So this is an example where we ask them to take pictures, and these are real pictures. I mean, look how beautiful these pictures are. It's like as though you picked it up from the internet, and these were just individuals, consumers, taking pictures, because we all, we're using filters, we know Instagram. So now asking for media feedback is not that big of a leap of faith. But this allowed us to see how, coconut in this case was being consumed in different meals. And if there's one thing that should stand out, is majority of the meals, not all, are healthy, right? And that was something that we could, again, coming back to that idea of a mosaic, right? We could put together these tiny insight nuggets and look at it and say, wow, just across the board, one, these are people who care a lot about their food. Just look at the presentation of the food. And two, they're largely healthy meals, right? And then, of course, we could dig into other things. So the way that we do diaries is we use WhatsApp chat, and we ask them to respond there. We use Typeform, which just has a good user interface for doing surveys, but it's not cheap. You could also use Jotform if you wanted to, or Google Forms, but Typeform allows us to upload audio, video as well, and an integration with Google Sheets. so that all the data can just come into Google Sheets and we can look at it, in this mosaic form, just one single sheet which has all the images in there. We also asked them to send us video recordings of them using that same product. Again, this is where it gives you context of what else is around them as they're doing what they're doing, right?
Hi there. So today I'm going to show you my breakfast/lunch. I'm making a papaya/coconut smoothie. I already have my papaya.
So we actually collected 30 minutes of video recording, just snapshots like this, like 1 minute, 2 minute videos across all participants, showing us how they went about making their breakfast meals and talking to us, because we would encourage them to talk to us about what's going through their mind. Why did they make this choice? Is it the same as the day before? Why is it different, right? Again, to just try to get into their mind as much as we can without actually being there.
Hi there. So today I'm going to show you my...
Sorry. We also collect audio recordings, and audio allows us to overcome language barriers and time restrictions. If there are mothers, we did a study where we were talking to mothers and they didn't have time. They were handling kids and the house. And so just sending an audio recording became very easy. This is another way in which we collected in-context data. And then we would live chat with them because we're already interacting with them on WhatsApp. So it wasn't really hard for us to follow up from a picture or a video and then ask them to explain that in a little bit more detail. And these were some chats that we got out of that. The last thing is a solution space where we put a few options in front of them and we ask them to rank them and then talk to us about those rankings. So we put up 3 options here. These were VR players who were doing virtual reality in their homes with tight spaces. And these are pictures that they're sharing. And we asked them what mattered most. And then they told us the first one mattered most, the idea of like me getting hit every time I played my game. And I would like a solution that solves for that, right? So because we are able to layer on these nuggets, and build that mosaic, our insights can be pretty robust because and rigorous because we are able to validate that using different methodologies, right? 2 types of interviews and 1 diary. And that has created a lot of buy-in with clients. So I just want to quickly just wrap this section up on slow data and say, this is inspired by the PACE layers and something that came out of the research ops community. They have a very thriving Slack group if anyone's interested in joining that. And here, what we're trying to do is get to that culture part, right? Because that's where we operate. It's one of the slowest moving layers. The top is the fashion, right? Like the trends move so fast. And what we are trying to do is get to that piece through different touch points at different points of time. So we can go back to the same group 6 months later and just ask them again, similar questions around their eating habits. We did this with eating habits during the lockdown, did a study, and then did the same study 2 months later with the same group to understand if anything had changed and what influenced or impacted their change over time. And I think there's a lot of power in doing research over time, as long as it's done in bite sizes, because otherwise 6 months, no one has the time or the budget to be able to commission that kind of research at one go. So yeah, by reframing the research that we do as agile sprints to collect these insight nuggets and then adopting new methods to match, we think what we're doing is making it more accessible to non-academic stakeholders. And I think from the last 2 years, we've been able to validate our own hypothesis in that regard. People are very interested in diary data, for example, because it's such a representation of lived experience in a way that they're not familiar with and they're not used to. And we found that, a pretty powerful way of selling the value of anthropological research. We've also had really good comments from participants who are themselves very interested in this method. And they tell us things like, wow, I learned a lot about myself. I didn't know that I was doing this till you had me log it every day. And so it creates a lot of buy-in where if we reached out to them again 6 months later and say, hey, remember that study? Would you participate in a follow-up? They're all gung-ho for it. Because it was very much, it felt very personal, it felt very friendly, and it was fundamentally different from what and how they perceived market research to be, which usually would just stop at surveys. So what does the future of research, digital research look like? This is the space in which Pucho is currently operating. As I told you, we're trying to scale this. We really want to digitize and incorporate digital methods and ways of thinking into qualitative research analysis. So one is conversational design, just very fundamentally creating experiences that are conversational, using video asks, which means even in our diaries, the researcher records herself rather than just asking the question, what are you having for breakfast today? Taking a video saying, hi, I'm Taapsi. Good morning. It's day one of your diary. Can you upload a video of you using coconut today? And it's a recording, right? But it's going out where suddenly there's a face, it's not just a blah question. And so it just creates more buy-in and encourages more honest responses and more rapport. At the research intelligence side, there's a lot that's happening now in text analytics. I mean, it's unbelievable. I'm only skimming the surface. This is a new space for me as well. But there's there's natural language processing where you can use technology to key up certain words. If someone says this, can you find similar structures of sentences that mean that, not keyword searches, but structures of sentences that could mean that, which is really powerful. So, we use, data analytical tool, qualitative analytical tools. I've done Atlas TI before. I've used Max QDA. And this basically does that, right? That's what NLP would do, is help you code and tag things up. The power of anthropology is going to be in building out those ontologies, right? Ways of looking at the world and taxonomy. So if anyone's interested in data science, then there's a ripe field for anthropologists in that space, because it's moving towards the organization of labels. People are tired of labels. There are more labels than we know what to do with in this world. The idea is the meaningful organization of those labels. And that meaning can only come after you talk to people, make sense of the data, and then give it to a data scientist and say, this is how we think you should organize the meaning, organize a bunch of labels into a meaningful framework, right? In the context of what you're researching. And of course, data ownership is, it's a given now, data privacy, consent, how you collect the data, how do you share the data, co-creating the data, transparency around that. This is going to be more and more critical going forward, especially as we start using digital media and digital means for collecting that data. So this is just something that we are building out at a product level at Pucho. So this is our own, just a picture of the product that's being built out for diaries. Again, like I told you, it's the face of the researcher. You can ask questions. All of this is around building rapport digitally, which is so hard to do. So we've tried to incorporate these different ways of doing that. That's on the left, which is you can get asks every day that are timed. And then on the right is a representation of that stuff for the researcher, which means as the questions come in, this is how it could look. And this is how a researcher could make sense of rich media insights as they come in. So that's it, guys. I really think this is an apt way to end, which is, it's not that the old methods go away, it's that new choices get added. And that's what we're trying to do, is repurpose, represent, reframe what we do in anthropology to make it more digestible, more accessible, and more user-friendly in the business setting.
All right, well, thank you. And we'll open it up now for questions. So if you have a question, there's just 15 of us here, so just ask directly.
Yep.
I've got a question. I'm curious about the pathway personas you create. I'm just wondering what the pathway means in that context.
Yeah, good thing to pick up on. So when I first started doing personas, I found that marketing personas, which basically is customer segmentation, is largely just based on demographic attributes, right? So 30-year-old male, white male who drives this car, has 2 kids and wants to do dash, right? And his biggest challenge is dash, right? And that's what a persona chart traditionally looked like. What we do with our personas is we anchor the personas in a journey ecosystem. Now the journey, so the two are connected. A journey is not just a website journey, which again is traditionally how you think about journeys, is you entered the website and then you clicked on this and you searched for something and then you added it to the cart and then you checked out, you put in your billing information and you checked out. Like that's a classic journey. our journey ecosystem is very much inspired by anthropological thinking, right? So it's not only milestones, but it's also who are the influencers in this milestone? Like who shapes that behavior, right? What are the challenges? What are the workarounds? Is a very, very powerful concept. Workarounds are enablers, which means when someone is facing a challenge, when they're facing a challenge doing something, how are they currently resolving that? Right? Like what is their workaround? What is enabling them to move past that challenge? Because usually that's where the solution lies. So anyhow, we map out an entire journey ecosystem. Then we use that ecosystem to create a pathway persona, saying that for this job to be done along this journey, this is the type of person, or these are the characteristics of people who want to go down this path in order to achieve their goal of getting this job done, or reaching that motivation that got them into the journey to begin with. So that's why it's called a pathway persona. It's based on metrics of success as opposed to demographic insights.
Thank you.
And I'll have for questions, if you'll just not introduce yourself, but say your name and then ask the question. We'll keep track that way. You got it.
Oh, I'm Tom Bacola again. I don't have a question as much as I have an observation. And just I'm sitting here, I'm probably the oldest student in the university at 76. But as I look back and I'm watching you present, it's like, you know, while I lived at a different time and I started my companies at a different time, what's exciting is to see someone with a background in anthropology actually becoming an entrepreneur and actually using these technologies to create something unique. And just watching your presentation, first of all, I have to say it's a wonderful presentation. I've been through a lot of them. It's more marketing oriented. My organization, CEO2, we don't worry about products as much as organization development. So we bring groups together, but we use all of the same tools. We use ethnography exclusively, and I didn't know it until I came back to school 2 years or 3 years ago to get a degree in anthropology. So just bravo, wonderful. I mean, your excitement and your sense of wonder is just infectious. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm deeply passionate about this. And to your point about professionals already using the methodologies that anthropology kind of owns and says that it owns is something that I've also seen. And I think the world is moving the discipline needs to move in a direction of collaborative work across departments, because there's a lot that's happening. I mean, you could use card sorting and mind mapping, which comes out of design thinking very effectively in anthropological research. You could use desirability studies, which again gets used in marketing and branding and social media work very seamlessly into our anthropological methods, and they enhance our understanding of what it is that we want to uncover and learn more about, rather than replace one for the other. So I think that's where I'm also really excited, and I'm constantly learning, because again, there's so much out there that's already being done that we in anthropology don't know about. I learned most of my, all of these words that I'm using, card sorting, affinity mapping, mind maps, mental models, desirability studies. I didn't learn anything of this in school. I learned all of this getting out and reading and trying to see what could work in the context of what we're doing.
I think that piece right there, most people get out of college and it's the last book they read. And yet the magic in the world is reading. If you read anything, if you read one book a year, you're 100% ahead of most of the population. So take that as something to look at. You should never stop reading, especially in your area of expertise. So yeah, very exciting. I think the other piece is, I sat on a call with the American Anthropology Association. They're having a big brouhaha about, what they're going to do going forward. And, applied anthropology is the future. yes, doing research, but you can do research on a dead culture, or you can do research real time in our culture right now and apply it. And what's even more exciting, and even though you're doing product research or like that, imagine doing research to guide a culture, to be able to actually take that and guide a culture proactively. And we're at a time right now where a lot of our cultures are lost. So how do we actually become meaningful there? Just all kinds of opportunities for anthropology in this period of time in our history. Sorry to hijack that, but you just remind me of all that.
Okay, I'm flattered. Thank you.
Yeah, there's probably real ethical challenges in terms of the use of video, and do you use NDAs as non-disclosures?
Yes.
Yeah. So
100%. I mean, consent is a very, very important part of the research that we do. We not only get consent, but we write it in plain English so that people understand. And our consent forms are inspired by the AAA guidelines on ethical research. So things like the fact that the study is voluntary, the fact that these are the people who are going to access your personally identifying information. If we share it publicly, this is what will be shown. It'll be anonymized, it'll be pseudonymized. So a lot of that is necessary. This is who you can contact if you want us to erase your private information, your personally identifying information from the database. They also get paid. So none of this is free, because at the end of the day, we're buying their data in order to for it to work for us as a business. So they get compensated for their time, and then that becomes transactional. So it's very clear that at the end of the day, if you're not happy with your information, or you're not happy with you being associated with that information, we are happy to delete your PII so that you are just erased from the system. But that data that you have shared, that's something that we own, unless you've done it for free.
Okay. So generally for you, then your company owns the data and not the client that you're working with?
It depends on the project. So if it's a client-funded project where the client says, I want to own the data, these are my customers, then the client pays the incentive. And it really comes down to who pays for the data, right? Who pays the incentive?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there more questions, or?
I see a couple of chats. Can you tell me, this is by Lana. Can you tell us about the diary platform that you're building? Yes. So the diary tool is incorporates all the things that I've not been able to find out there in the marketplace when it comes to diary tools. I'm a big fan of the diary method, as I already mentioned. And a couple of ways in which we build the tool is, one, it's built entirely on a notification system. So because of the context in India, like I said, we run on WhatsApp. We don't even use SMS. We only use WhatsApp it is. So we've built a diary tool where you get pinged as a chat on WhatsApp telling you, hey, you have a question open right now, right? Or you have a question to answer. And we can schedule that at different times of the day. So what the whole premise of building the platform came from the question that we asked, which is, what is the most time-consuming, laborious part of doing research that is not the analysis itself? Because the analysis, you need trained researchers to do the analysis. But there's a big chunk of research, which is scheduling, monitoring, nudging, inviting, onboarding, transcribing. These are all parts of the research process, which actually can be automated to a big extent. So our researchers started by doing a lot of this manually, and then realized, wow, what if we could build a scheduling tool where you set the time, you record yourself asking your video ask, the researcher does that, and using WhatsApp notifications or SMS notifications or email notifications, you can send it to participants. They get a ping exactly when you need them to do it. For example, 11 o'clock, share a video of Dash at 6 in the evening, how are you feeling? How was your day? Did anything not pan out in the way you wanted it to pan out? You can ask them those questions and they can respond using multimedia. So really that's the gist of the platform that we built. And we've got a lot of small tweaks to the user experience, everything built around how do we encourage more, how do we build more rapport using the digital media.
Well, thank you so much, Taapsi. And